He doesn't just walk into the coffee shop, he arrives like the scene has been waiting for him. A designer jacket drapes over his shoulders as if tailored by fate itself, that perfect two-day stubble catching the light, and a smile that somehow manages to be both knowing and unassuming. It's not loud confidence, it's the kind that slips under the radar and still manages to turn heads. By the time you've decided whether he's attractive or just magnetic, he's already made the barista laugh, secured 2 phone numbers with the subtlety of a card shark sliding aces into his hand, and left 3 women staring into their cappuccinos, wondering why their perfectly constructed emotional armor suddenly feels flimsy. You watch all of this like a theatergoer caught between admiration and confusion. How does he move so fluidly in these moments, like he's memorized a script you've never seen? How does he read women as if they're open diaries while you're still trying to make sense of the title page? How does he navigate romantic complexity with the precision of a surgeon while you're stuck second-guessing whether she's actually into you or just being polite out of habit? Here's the first secret: he wasn't born this way. This isn't genetic luck, divine charisma, or some mysterious blessing from the gods of attraction. What you're witnessing is scar tissue that learned to dance. The polished performance is the result of wounds healed over stronger, less naive, and far more strategic. The grace you see now, it was forged in fire. That man, whether he knows it or not, is carrying the echoes of past heartbreaks in his pocket. He didn't set out to become fluent in the subtle language of attraction. He was forced into it. At some point, life cornered him into making a choice: either keep losing in the game of love or figure out the rules no one ever actually teaches you. And so, like a self-taught musician with no sheet music, he learned. By failing. By misreading signals. By getting burned hard. If it feels theatrical, it's because it is just not the kind of theater you see on stage. Think of it as an invisible dress rehearsal repeated over years. Each rejection, each "I'm not ready for a relationship that masked I've found someone else" became another scene he learned to play differently. Over time, he discovered how to time his lines, when to hold eye contact, and when to pull back just enough to make her lean in. And here's where the illusion deepens. Most people think charisma is a gift, like having green eyes or perfect pitch. But if you look closer, you'll see the fingerprints of experience all over it. It's not absence of effort, it's effort so refined it's invisible. Like a professional dancer who makes you forget their feet are blistered, or the way an old violin sings because it has been played through decades of mistakes and triumphs. The man in front of you has practiced his moves until they no longer look like moves. You might think you're watching natural charm. What you're really watching is survival turned into art. Walk into any social gathering and you'll spot him instantly. He's the one who makes talking to women look like breathing effortless, fluid, natural. Words seem to spill from his mouth like they've been rehearsed, but somehow they still manage to land just right. He knows when to joke, when to compliment, and when to pull back, always seeming to understand the mood of the room with a level of precision that makes you think he might have a supernatural ability to read people. From the outside, it's easy to believe that this man was simply born with an innate charm, like he has some special connection to the female psyche that the rest of us will never have access to. It's the fantasy we've been fed by Hollywood, the effortlessly smooth guy who walks into a bar and immediately has every woman's attention. But this isn't a fairy tale, and that man isn't the product of some cosmic gift. The truth, what seems effortless, is in fact the result of years of learning, failure, and most importantly, experience. What looks like an inborn talent is actually the product of a process most people don't ever talk about: the long, often painful road of figuring out how human attraction actually works. The charm, the confidence, the emotional intelligence. It wasn't gifted to him. It was learned the hard way. This man has been through countless awkward conversations, embarrassing moments, and soul-crushing rejections that most of us would rather forget. But instead of letting those failures define him, he used them to improve. Like a sculptor chiseling away at a rough block of stone, he kept refining his approach, testing different strategies, and analyzing every misstep until it all clicked. At first, he wasn't confident. He wasn't charming. In fact, he was probably just as lost as you feel now. But over time, he learned the patterns of human attraction, the nuances of body language, the subtle hints in tone of voice, the ways people communicate without saying a word. The confidence you see today is the result of trial and error, not some magical gift. It's the outcome of thousands of small, seemingly insignificant moments where he learned, adapted, and grew. This is the great illusion of modern dating culture. We believe that some people are just naturally good with women, while others are doomed to struggle forever. We see the smooth talker in the corner of the bar and think he must have had some easy ride to get there, that he's got the upper hand in this dating game. But the reality is that he's learned, often painfully, how to play it. The truth is, What appears effortless is actually a highly calculated process. Every word, every glance, every gesture is the product of a man who's had to teach himself the rules of attraction through experience. And the reason he seems so calm and collected is because he's no longer playing by the same emotional rules you are. He's moved beyond desperation, beyond anxiety, and beyond fear of rejection. He's learned the art of emotional detachment. This is the part that's most difficult to understand. How does someone get to a point where they're no longer emotionally invested in the outcome, yet still manage to come across as magnetic? It's a delicate balance, one that comes from learning over time how to let go of the need for validation. And yet this process, this mastery begins with nothing more than painful lessons learned from rejection. It's not some mystifying ability to read minds. It's a skill that's honed through endless trial and error into what looks like effortless confidence. Think about a concert pianist performing a complex piece of music. As their fingers dance across the keys, they seem to effortlessly produce melodies that flow with such beauty they make it look easy. The audience is mesmerized, unable to detect the years of practice, the endless hours spent perfecting every note. They don't see the mistakes, the frustrations, or the times when the pianist wanted to give up. They only hear the music, the finished product. Now imagine this. The same principle applies to the man who's so smooth in his interactions with women. He may seem like he has a natural gift, an effortless ease in his social exchanges, but in reality, it's just like that pianist. It's a result of thousands of hours of trial and error, countless awkward moments, and a great deal of emotional discomfort that have all been internalized over time. His smoothness doesn't come from some innate talent. It comes from an ability to refine his approach until it feels second nature. Let's take a moment and consider how a professional musician practices. In the beginning, each piece is full of mistakes. The music doesn't come out fluid or natural. It's disjointed, unsure, and often frustrating. But over time, repetition makes those movements automatic. What once took intense concentration and effort now flows freely, seemingly without thought. It becomes part of the musician, ingrained in their muscle memory. The man you see across the room effortlessly charming everyone around him, he's been through the exact same process, though, in a different medium. He has practiced the art of attraction over and over again, sometimes in painful and embarrassing ways. Each time he misread a signal, made a mistake, or suffered a rejection, it was like hitting a wrong note. But instead of giving up, he kept playing. With each failure, he refined his approach until it became unconscious competence. When you watch him navigate a conversation, you're witnessing the culmination of all those missed cues, awkward silences, and moments of discomfort that he turned into valuable lessons. The charm, the confidence, the emotional intelligence. They weren't handed to him, they were earned through countless experiences. And now those lessons are so deeply embedded in his behavior that they seem effortless. The thing that most people miss is that this smoothness doesn't come from a lack of effort. It comes from refined effort, like a master chef who makes the perfect dish look easy. The man who is great with women makes the process of conversation seem like it flows naturally. But behind that smooth exterior, there's a deep reservoir of lessons learned, the time he spent figuring out what works and what doesn't, what makes women feel comfortable and what turns them off. To him, it's almost like muscle memory. He's learned what to say, when to say it, and when to be silent. And just like the pianist, he's put in the practice to make his skills seem like magic. But in truth, they're anything but. This isn't a story of a man who was born with some divine gift for understanding women. This is the story of a man who became great by making the mistakes that others are too afraid to make. It's the result of playing the game over and over again, each time learning something new, refining his technique, and improving his results. He doesn't talk about his failures because they've already been integrated into his approach. He doesn't need to boast about how hard he worked to get here because his results speak for themselves. What we see as effortless charm is in fact the product of years of practice, failure, and self-improvement. And the reason it seems effortless is because it has been practiced so much that it now operates in the background like a finely tuned instrument. Before he was the smooth talker you see today, before he learned to read every emotional cue and navigate romantic waters with the grace of a dancer, he was just like you. He was a romantic, an idealist, a believer in the fairy tale love that movies and songs promised. In the early days, he didn't know any better. He believed that love could conquer all, that devotion was enough to win someone's heart, and that soulmates were real. But life had different plans for him. The man who now seems like an expert in romance wasn't always the player or smooth operator. No, he started as a Hosidim, good guy. The one who believed that love was a transaction based on mutual respect, kindness, and loyalty. On his first date, he brought flowers, wrote heartfelt notes, and made sure to remember the little things: her favorite book, her preferred coffee, the anniversary of their first meeting. He was the man who genuinely cared, who treated women with respect and adoration, thinking that this was the way to win their hearts. And yet, time after time, his efforts were met with disappointment. Instead of being rewarded for his romantic sincerity, he found that the women he adored were more interested in the men who treated them with calculated indifference. The women he cherished often went for the ones who barely seemed to notice them, or worse, the ones who didn't care at all. This confused him deeply. How could his sincerity, his respect, and his devotion not be enough? The disconnect between his expectations and reality created a painful cognitive dissonance, a mental tension caused by the contradiction between his beliefs about love and what he was seeing unfold in his life. He had been taught that sincerity was the key to winning someone's affection. He had believed that devotion and emotional investment were the foundation of a successful relationship. But what he experienced was the opposite. The more invested he became, the less reciprocation he received. And so began his journey as a romantic refugee. The romantic refugee is a man whose idealized belief in love and relationships has been shattered by the brutal realities of life. It's not that he becomes cynical overnight. It's more that he begins to realize that the romantic ideals he once held so dearly weren't just unrealistic, they were actively counterproductive in the dating world. His love for women, his devotion wasn't a gift, it was perceived as weakness. His sincerity was seen as desperation, and his affection was often mistaken for a lack of options. This painful realization is the moment where something fundamental shifts inside him. He comes to understand that the way he approached love wasn't just ineffective, it was almost guaranteed to leave him heartbroken. But this was a pivotal moment. It wasn't the end of his journey, it was the beginning of a new approach. From this moment forward, he would no longer lead with emotion alone. He would learn to navigate the world of love with a strategic mindset grounded in realism rather than idealism. The transformation begins in the wake of what we call the final betrayal, the event that forces a complete overhaul of his understanding of relationships. This could be the girlfriend who leaves him for his best friend, the fiancé who cheats with someone who treats her poorly, or the woman who tells him that he's too nice only to later choose someone who is demonstrably less caring, less loyal, and less invested in her well-being. This final betrayal is the turning point that forces him to confront the painful truth he had been playing by the wrong rules. And so, he adjusts. He learns that love is not as simple as devotion and respect. It is a game of complex emotional dynamics, psychological triggers, and social strategies. He must unlearn the lessons he grew up with and start studying what actually works in the world of human attraction. But here's the catch. He doesn't just learn from others, he begins to test the boundaries himself. He embarks on a personal experiment seeking to understand the psychology of women not through idealization, but through observation, practice, and iteration. He stops leading with his heart and starts leading with his curiosity. His emotional investment shifts from being about proving his worth to being about studying the dynamics of attraction and connection. This is when he enters the laboratory phase of his romantic education, a phase that will change him forever. The laboratory phase begins not with a sense of triumph, but with a realization, a gut-wrenching one, that the beliefs he once held about love and relationships were wrong. Up until now, he had lived under the illusion that sincerity, devotion, and emotional availability were the keys to winning a woman's heart. But after enough heartbreak, betrayal, and disappointment, he began to see the truth. Romantic ideals alone don't always lead to success. Sometimes they can actually work against you. This revelation is painful. For a man who once believed wholeheartedly in the beauty of love, realizing that his deepest qualities, the very things that made him a good guy, were often misinterpreted as weaknesses, is a tough pill to swallow. He discovers that his kindness and devotion, which he had always thought were virtues, were seen by some as signs of desperation. His willingness to open up emotionally, to give love freely, was often mistaken for a lack of options, a man who was too available for his own good. And so, the romantic refugee is forced into a new way of thinking. The transformation happens after the final betrayal. It's the moment that breaks him, not just emotionally, but in a deeper, more profound way. A betrayal that not only shatters his heart, but also shatters his belief system about what it means to be loved. The most painful part of this shift is the feeling of being replaced, whether it's the woman he adored leaving him for someone else, or finding out that she was more attracted to the guy who played games with her heart than the one who poured his soul into their relationship. It all leads to the same conclusion. His approach wasn't just ineffective, it was counterproductive. It's during this devastating period that he must choose. Does he continue to believe in his romantic ideals even though they've failed him time and time again? Or does he discard those beliefs and embrace a new reality, one where attraction is not about self-sacrifice or sincerity alone, but about understanding the true psychology of human desire? The final betrayal, whether it's a girlfriend leaving him for his best friend, a fiancé cheating with someone who treats her poorly, or the woman who tells him you're too nice while dating men who are less kind, becomes a psychological catalyst. It forces him to let go of his idealism, to stop seeing women as objects of pure affection, and to start seeing them as complex emotional beings with desires, insecurities, and needs that often don't align with what he was taught to expect. From here he transitions into what can be called the strategic realism phase. No longer a slave to his emotions, he begins to operate in a world where attraction is based on psychological principles rather than cultural ideals. This shift is not about losing his authenticity, but about understanding what actually works in the real world of human attraction. In this phase, he begins to take a more scientific approach to love. No longer looking at dating as a game of sincerity and vulnerability, he begins to test hypotheses. He starts to experiment with the strategies that work while also analyzing why they work. He no longer invests emotionally in every interaction. Instead, he approaches it with curiosity, focusing less on whether the woman likes him and more on how attraction actually works. He stops trying to impress her and starts studying her psychology. This isn't manipulation, it's behavioral science. He begins to see dating not as an emotional landscape, but as a social experiment. Each interaction is a controlled experiment. He starts analyzing the signals he receives, paying attention to body language, tone of voice, and the smallest behavioral shifts. Each of these small pieces of data teaches him more about what works and what doesn't. Through this process, he learns that his earlier idealistic approach, trying to prove his worth, show his loyalty, and shower her with affection, was misguided. Instead, he learns that attraction is a dance of emotional dynamics, and that in order to be successful, he needs to understand those dynamics deeply. It's in this laboratory phase that he learns the most crucial lesson of all: detachment is attractive. When he is emotionally invested in the outcome, he comes across as needy and desperate. But when he approaches relationships with curiosity, when he no longer seeks validation from a woman, he begins to exude a quiet, confident indifference. This detachment is not coldness or emotional unavailability, it's emotional self-sufficiency. He has learned to maintain his own sense of worth regardless of whether a woman likes him or not. He is no longer seeking approval. This shift creates an attractive air of mystery, something that is both intriguing and magnetic. The man who was once caught in the emotional whirlpool of unrequited love and over-attachment is now free. Free to engage with women without the fear of rejection. Free to test new strategies without the burden of expectation. And in that freedom, he becomes more attractive than ever before. The final betrayal is the emotional catalyst that drives the romantic refugee to reevaluate everything he thought he knew about love relationships and women. It's not just a bad breakup or a fleeting disappointment, it's the kind of heartbreak that shatters his belief system completely. This is the moment when he finally admits to himself the idealized version of love that he had been chasing was not only flawed, but also damaging. It could be the betrayal of a girlfriend who leaves him for his best friend, the fiancé who cheats with someone who treats her poorly, or the gut-wrenching realization that the woman he's been pouring his heart into has been playing him all along. Whatever the situation, the result is the same. The man is left with a broken heart and a profound sense of disillusionment. It's in the aftermath of this betrayal that he begins to question everything he thought he knew about relationships. He starts to wonder how he missed all the warning signs. He looks back at the relationship and wonders how he could have been so blind to the reality of the situation. The cognitive dissonance, the mental stress caused by the gap between his beliefs and the harsh truth, becomes unbearable. He had always believed that sincerity, devotion, and emotional investment were the foundations of a successful relationship. Yet he now realizes that these very qualities were often interpreted as weakness by the women he cared about. The final betrayal forces him into a corner where he can no longer hold on to the romantic ideals he once held so dear. It's no longer enough to just believe in love. He has to understand it on a deeper level. He has to come to terms with the fact that attraction isn't based on sincerity alone. It's based on emotional dynamics, psychological triggers, and behavioral patterns that he had never fully understood before. For many men, this is the breaking point, the moment when they are forced to let go of the fantasy of love that culture has sold them and face the reality of human attraction. They can no longer afford to be naive. They can no longer afford to be the nice guy who believes that kindness and devotion will automatically lead to reciprocation. The truth is much messier and much more complicated. At this crossroads, the man faces a crucial choice. Does he continue to believe in love as he once did, hoping that it will eventually work out, Or does he accept the painful reality and begin to adapt? Most men after this final betrayal choose the latter. They realize that continuing to approach relationships with the same ideals that led them to pain is no longer an option. This is where the strategic realism phase begins. The man who once relied on his emotional connection to guide him through relationships now shifts his approach. He becomes more like a scientist studying human behavior, carefully observing the dynamics of attraction and relationships from a distance. Instead of investing all his emotions into every interaction, he begins to operate from a place of curiosity, not looking to prove his worth, but to understand what truly drives human attraction. He starts to see dating and relationships as more of a psychological puzzle than an emotional experience. He analyzes his past mistakes and learns to read the subtle signals that he missed before. He watches how women respond to certain behaviors, and he starts to understand what truly creates attraction and what kills it. He stops treating relationships as a fairy tale and begins to approach them as a real-world experiment in human connection. The final betrayal is the moment of transformation. It's the point where the romantic refugee realizes that love, as he once understood it, is not enough to navigate the complex world of human attraction. He now sees that love operates on a different set of rules that require him to be emotionally intelligent, self-aware, and strategic. This shift doesn't happen overnight, and it's not without pain. But it's this pain, this deep emotional scar, that becomes the foundation of his new approach to love and relationships. The scar tissue, once a symbol of his brokenness, becomes a source of strength, making him more resilient, more emotionally detached, and ultimately more attractive. The man who once wore his heart on his sleeve is now more guarded, more in control, and much more dangerous. Not because he's cold, but because he's learned to protect himself from emotional harm. After the final betrayal, the man who once wore his heart on his sleeve now begins to see love through a different lens. The emotional innocence that once guided him is replaced by something much more pragmatic, a strategic realism. No longer motivated by the naive belief that love conquers all, he now approaches relationships with a mindset shaped by his scars. His belief in love is no longer purely idealistic. It's grounded in psychological principles that he has learned through painful experience. This shift is not an immediate one. It doesn't happen with a single dramatic realization. Instead, it's a gradual process of recalibration. He begins to understand that emotional availability, while still important, isn't the sole determinant of success in romantic relationships. Instead, it's about understanding dynamics: what creates attraction, what maintains it, and what ultimately leads to fulfillment in a relationship. He starts to see relationships as more than just emotional connections. They are social contracts that require balance, awareness, and mutual psychological investment. In this new phase, he stops chasing women in the traditional sense. He no longer operates from a place of desperation or the need for validation. Instead, he approaches relationships with a deep sense of curiosity. He no longer seeks to impress, but to understand. He's not emotionally detached in the way that someone might be to avoid connection. Instead, he's detached enough to study human attraction with the same precision a scientist might use to observe a specimen. He becomes a behavioral scientist in the world of dating, analyzing patterns, reading social cues, and gathering data. The emotional detachment that others might see as coldness is actually a sign of his emotional growth. It's no longer about needing the relationship to succeed in order to feel validated. It's about gathering insights that will help him succeed in future relationships. By not needing validation from others, he creates an attractive indifference. He stops seeking approval, and as a result, he becomes more interesting, more magnetic. As he moves through this phase of strategic realism, he begins to refine his approach to relationships with military precision. No longer operating on instinct alone, he applies the lessons he's learned, sometimes painfully, about how human attraction works. He understands the importance of timing, of not being overly available, and of creating an aura of mystery. What he discovers is that the more he pulls back, the more women are drawn to him. The emotional distance that once felt like rejection now feels like a form of emotional strength. His behavior shifts from emotional devotion to strategic empathy. He begins to read women not from a place of worship or desire, but from a place of scientific curiosity. He's no longer consumed by a need to be loved. Instead, he seeks to understand the psychological patterns that drive attraction. As he continues to test and experiment with different behaviors, he becomes more adept at recognizing what women respond to and why. In essence, he becomes a human behavior expert, studying interactions with women in the same way a scientist might study the laws of nature. Over time, he learns to see through the surface-level behaviors that many people get distracted by. He begins to understand what's going on beneath the surface. He learns to spot the difference between polite behavior and genuine attraction, to recognize when a woman is testing him and when she's authentically interested. This analytical approach gives him an edge in romantic interactions. Instead of being driven by emotion, he now operates from logical observation. He notices the smallest details, the way she reacts to a compliment, the way she shifts her posture when he speaks, the subtle nuances in her tone. He no longer feels the need to obsess over his own insecurities or doubts. Instead, he decodes the emotional patterns in the interaction and adapts accordingly. This shift into strategic realism doesn't make him cold or robotic. In fact, it makes him more attractive than ever. The more he learns to control his own emotional impulses, the more he creates emotional space for the woman. And in this space, he begins to learn that attraction is not about emotional investment. It's about understanding the complex psychology of the people you're interacting with. Instead of seeing relationships as an all-or-nothing gamble, he begins to see them as an ongoing experiment. Every conversation, every date, every encounter is an opportunity to refine his approach, to test hypotheses, and to grow his emotional intelligence. The more he learns about the intricacies of human connection, the more effortlessly he begins to interact with women. But the beauty of it is, he's no longer dependent on their approval. The emotional freedom he has cultivated through pain has made him emotionally self-sufficient. It's this freedom, the ability to interact without fear of rejection or failure, that makes him irresistibly attractive. The more he detaches from the need for validation, the more he becomes a magnet for the very attention he once craved. His detachment, far from being a shield, is the thing that draws women in. They sense the depth, the confidence, and the emotional security that he carries now, and they find themselves attracted to it. The shift from romantic idealism to strategic realism is the turning point that allows him to break free from the self-sabotaging behaviors that once held him back. It's a painful shift, but it's one that ultimately leads him to romantic mastery, not because he's learned how to manipulate women, but because he's learned how to understand them. Now that the romantic refugee has transitioned into a strategic mindset, the true test begins. This is the phase where his personal journey really takes shape, the laboratory phase. It's where he stops feeling like a player in a game and starts to view himself as a scientist in the field of human attraction, carefully observing and experimenting to understand how people, especially women, think, feel, and respond. In this phase, his approach to dating and relationships becomes more about learning than about performing. He's no longer chasing validation or approval from women, and instead, he's focused on understanding the patterns of human behavior. His mindset shifts to that of a curious investigator, someone who is testing hypotheses about what creates desire and why certain behaviors elicit certain responses. This is where the experimentation begins. Every conversation, every date, and every interaction is treated as an opportunity to test out new ideas, theories, and strategies. He's no longer operating from emotional impulse or seeking to impress. Instead, he's interested in discovering what actually works in real-world social dynamics. He understands that attraction isn't driven by instinct alone, but by psychological principles that can be understood, learned, and applied. During this phase, he begins to dissect his past relationships, looking back at his previous mistakes and analyzing the patterns he missed in those interactions. He replays the moments where things went wrong, trying to understand what could have been different. He starts to notice signals that he missed before, subtle shifts in body language, tiny changes in tone, and emotional cues that weren't apparent at first glance. For the first time, he begins to see the realities of human attraction. He understands that attraction doesn't operate according to the ideals of love and romance that he was raised with. Instead, it follows a set of psychological rules and social dynamics that are often counterintuitive. The things he once thought would make a woman attracted to him, being overly available, showering her with compliments, or constantly seeking her approval, are not the things that create lasting attraction. In fact, he begins to realize that the most attractive men are often those who don't chase. He learns that women are more drawn to men who are slightly less available, who aren't constantly at their beck and call. He starts to understand that mystery is one of the most powerful tools in attraction. When you reveal everything about yourself too quickly, the intrigue fades, but when you leave something to the imagination, you create curiosity and desire. This understanding becomes a key element in his approach. He experiments with the timing of his availability, the pace of his interactions, and the level of emotional investment he gives to each situation. He learns that playful teasing can create more attraction than earnest compliments, and that a woman might be more interested in him if she feels like she has to work a little to get his attention. As he moves further into this phase, he begins to detach emotionally from outcomes. He no longer feels the pressure of needing every interaction to go perfectly or end with a romantic connection. Instead, he approaches dating as a series of experiments, each designed to test a hypothesis about what works and what doesn't. His approach is rooted in curiosity, not in the need to be liked, and this shift makes him infinitely more attractive. Because he's no longer seeking validation, he becomes more interesting. He doesn't try to impress with his words or actions. Instead, he lets his actions speak for themselves. His confidence, rooted in emotional self-sufficiency, becomes magnetic. He stops obsessing over whether a woman likes him, and instead he focuses on observing her, figuring out what she truly responds to, what makes her tick, and how he can interact with her in a way that creates authentic, lasting attraction. In the laboratory phase, he's not just experimenting with women, he's experimenting with himself. He's testing his emotional boundaries, challenging his old beliefs, and refining his understanding of how attraction works. And each time he experiments, he learns something new, gaining a deeper, more nuanced understanding of human connection. This is the phase that truly transforms him. It's where he stops being a victim of his own emotional impulses and starts becoming a master of his own emotional landscape. He learns that true mastery in relationships isn't about being perfect or saying the right thing all the time. It's about understanding the psychological patterns that govern human behavior and using that knowledge to create authentic, meaningful connections. Through this process, he becomes more emotionally resilient. He doesn't fear rejection anymore because he understands that rejection is just part of the process, a data point in his ongoing experiment. He doesn't tie his self-worth to the outcome of any single interaction, and this emotional freedom makes him even more attractive to the women he meets. Through the laboratory phase, the romantic refugee's evolution into a master of attraction begins to take shape. His strategic mindset, once forged by betrayal and heartbreak, becomes a tool of precision. He's no longer driven by emotional desperation or the need for validation. Instead, he operates with emotional intelligence, able to read social cues, analyze patterns, and make decisions based on curiosity, not fear of rejection. His interactions become a series of experiments, each one offering valuable insight into the dynamics of human connection. He learns that true attraction doesn't come from being overly available or always following the script. It's about creating an emotional space, one where a woman can see him as a challenge, not just a safe option. He becomes less emotionally invested in each interaction, creating the paradox of strategic indifference, caring enough to be engaging but not so much that he's desperate for approval. This emotional detachment allows him to engage without fear, and in turn makes him more attractive. The strategic empathy he develops allows him to understand women's emotional needs not just from a place of admiration or resentment, but through a scientific lens. He learns to read the subtle signs of attraction, and most importantly, he understands when his own behavior is self-sabotaging. He identifies the moments when he's over-invested emotionally and knows how to pull back and create healthy boundaries. This process of emotional detachment is not about shutting off feelings. It's about emotional mastery, understanding that vulnerability, when managed properly, can be an asset, not a liability. He becomes capable of selective vulnerability, letting down his guard only when he feels that a woman is worthy of his emotional investment. Through this, he learns the art of accessibility without becoming emotionally dependent. His self-worth no longer hinges on external validation. As he grows in this phase, he also develops what I call the pattern recognition matrix, an intuitive understanding of female behavior that allows him to predict responses with uncanny accuracy. He can identify when a woman is genuinely interested or when she's simply enjoying the attention. He begins to recognize the emotional seasons in relationships, when things are cooling off, when someone is testing boundaries, and when deeper connection is forming. The most striking transformation, however, comes from his newfound ability to engage women in a way that makes them feel truly understood. His knowledge of their psychological patterns, emotional rhythms, and unconscious desires creates a unique bond, making him seem more emotionally present and connected than most men who operate purely on instinct. But this emotional literacy is not without its costs. As he becomes a more capable practitioner of attraction, he faces the success trap, the ability to attract women, but with emotional connections that often feel hollow. The emotional depth he's cultivated makes him great at creating attraction, but it also makes him wary of truly opening up. This paradox, being emotionally capable yet emotionally distant, often leaves him caught between desire for genuine connection and the fear that vulnerability will lead to more pain. Eventually, the romantic refugee develops what could be considered the ultimate paradox: defensive mastery. He's learned to avoid emotional danger while still being capable of forming deep, meaningful relationships. He can read women with the accuracy of a psychologist, understand emotional dynamics with the precision of an expert, and maintain his independence while offering authentic connection. However, the transformation doesn't come without difficulty. The emotional armor he's built to protect himself has made him less open to true intimacy. Even though he now has all the tools for emotional success, he sometimes struggles to let go of the defenses that have kept him safe. The success trap of emotional self-protection often makes it difficult for him to recognize and respond to authentic love when it's right in front of him. In time, the romantic refugee learns the key to this final stage: selective vulnerability. He learns how to trust again, how to lower his defenses for the right person. The ability to navigate this balance, offering emotional connection while maintaining self-sufficiency, is the final piece of his transformation into someone who understands love not only in theory but in practice. He has evolved from a broken idealist to a man who understands that true emotional mastery lies in the ability to connect without losing oneself. In the end, the romantic refugee understands one final truth: every master was once a disaster, and every expert in romantic dynamics was once a beginner. His journey is proof that pain can be the greatest teacher of all. Through his wounds, he has gained the tools to navigate the complex world of human connection. Scar tissue might be stronger than skin, but it's also less sensitive to touch, and sometimes that's what makes it so irresistibly attractive.